Good afternoon. I will now call to order the February 23rd policy session of the Phoenix City Council. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilman DeCiccio?
Here.
Councilmember Garcia?
Here.
Councilwoman Rodato?
Here.
Councilman Nowakowski?
Here.
Councilwoman Pastor?
Here.
Councilwoman Stark?
Here.
Councilman Waring?
Here.
Vice Mayor Williams?
Here.
Mayor Gallego?
Here. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll begin with council information and updates and follow-up requests. Council members.
Mayor.
Councilwoman Pastor.
Thank you. Mayor, I'd like to thank you today and staff for allowing me to be innovative and creative as I give my exciting District 4 updates with the community. On Saturday, February 27th, I will be doing a virtual Zoom with local Girl Scout troop and helping them earn their democracy badge. We will be speaking about women in leadership roles, and I'm excited to share my experience with these future leaders. Next, on Sunday, February 28th, I'll be celebrating the end of Black History Month with a mural crawl and a guided tour of Black History Matters mural project. This 6-hour event will begin at noon on Sunday. It will feature the artists who created the murals along with some complimentary food and beverage. More information about parking and the walking mural tour, visit www.28murals.eventbrite.com. My next update includes a partnership with friends at Agave Farms and Green Living magazine. Through this partnership, we will be hosting Food Box Mondays in March. Individuals who receive a free COVID test at Maryvale Community will receive a free food box to take home. We see this as a great partnership to promote healthy living and eating. Finally, my office will be promoting wellness for the entire family during the month of March, and I'm there with Gilbert. Wellness of mind, body, and spirit is important for healthy living. Over the 30 days, we will be sharing tips on diet, stress relief, breathing techniques, and animal and art therapy. Follow us on Twitter at Phoenix District 4 and join in the healthy living conversation. Mayor, this concludes my updates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Do we have any additional council member updates before we move to the budget?
Mayor.
Thank you. I'm sorry, who was that?
Councilwoman Guardado.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just, it's exciting. We have not had a meeting with all of our neighborhood leaders in the last couple of months. So we're excited that we're going to be doing our first one this upcoming week, just giving an update on all the great things that we're doing here at the city, and also getting feedback from them to see how they think that we're doing and what are other projects that we could be partnering together with all of our different neighborhood leaders. So excited to at least being able to see them through Zoom together and collaborating and working together on great projects here at the city. Also excited to announce that we're going to be doing a tour with the mayor of with one of the mayors of Goodyear and some of the council members. Goodyear has been very receptive in wanting to learn more about the Haven project that we started a few months ago. So they're excited to see what is it that we're doing. So excited to see some of these partnerships starting to happen, and making sure that the cities on the west side are becoming very curious to seeing what is it that we're doing here in the city of Phoenix, and hopefully collaborating on future efforts. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right, well, thank you to the council for the updates. We will next move to our city manager and an update on our budget.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Our item today to talk about is the 5-year general fund forecast, and it's the beginning of the 2021-2022 budget cycle. And just to refresh everyone's memory, we have a 4-month formal budget process that begins today with this 5-year forecast, and it moves to a trial budget proposal for public input in the middle of March. Then in April, we have public meetings scheduled for the whole month, followed by council meetings in May to hammer out the details, and it follows with the state's legally required council votes in June and July. So just a little bit of background. It's been over 10 years since the major recession affected our budget with a $250 million deficit in 2009-10 and 2010-11. And then we suffered a second downturn in 2014-2015 when we had to reduce another $60 million. Employees took pay reductions in 2 separate contracts. We reduced service levels, we froze hiring, and also during that time then pension costs climbed as we got more realistic cost estimates built into our system, and then also had more realistic revenue forecasts built. And we'll talk a little more about revenue forecasts in the presentation today. But in that time, the council monitored our expenses, made hard decisions about hiring and employment, and diversified the economic development beyond just real estate into education, medicine, bioscience, manufacturing, more tourism, and we worked with better revenue models. And we continue to pay all of our bills and meet all of our pension obligations. So by 2019, 2 years ago, we had achieved a structural balance and were able to award our employees with the first pay increase they had received in over 10 years. And I want to thank the council for that work and commitment, and also thank our employees for their commitment to provide great service even in the tough times when we had to reduce pay. That 2-year contract from 2019 is now coming to a close, and we're in the middle of negotiating that as well for another contract 2-year or more cycle that will begin in July. We could go to the presentation. So last year at this time, we were on pace for a balanced budget with significant additions for community services. And then the pandemic threw everything into disarray. We eliminated all the additions to the budget, we cut costs, we froze hiring, and the federal government provided CARES Act funding. The Phoenix economy did continue to work, and even with the hard stop on travel and tourism, our economy continued to work. And the diversification strategy put in place by the City Council 12 years ago really paid off as we saw significant building projects continuing that kept the economy moving. In addition, the fair taxation of online retail sales also was significant in our budgeting and in our forecasting. The 5-year forecast that we do annually shows what it takes to have a structurally balanced budget so that we can make good decisions about what we add or what we need to subtract, how much we can afford of different things, including employee pay. And the 5-year forecast further breaks down one-time and ongoing resources. Even with the pandemic, we have some resources available to rebuild our vehicle, our fleet, administrative technology, and infrastructure, the things that aren't really exciting so much, but they allow us to provide the exciting services, that infrastructure. We also have some resources to fairly compensate our employees, and depending on how all those needs are balanced, we'll have resources for some services that the community has repeatedly told us they need. There are still significant financial challenges that we have to navigate, however, and first among them is our public safety pension liability that today totals over $4 billion. What that means is we have increasing annual payments that will continue to take up a larger share of the budget, and Amber will discuss those in the presentation ahead, and we'll continue to have dialogue about how we can manage that effectively. And finally, we've looked at data around potential economic slowdowns. It's a responsible practice that Mr. Barton instituted a few years ago to help the council understand if we ran into more difficult times, what does that stress test look like in our budgeting? What do we need to be mindful of as we have a better sense of what the risks look like? So this is a 5-year forecast that gives you the baseline to start making budgetary decisions about how much revenue we have, in what way do we have that revenue, is it one time, is it ongoing, and that allows you to make decisions about how to balance the budget into the future. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation to Assistant City Manager Jeff Barton and also Budget and Research Director Amber Williamson. Jeff?
Thank you, Ed. Mayor, members of the council, it's a pleasure to be here today. I look at the 5-year forecast almost as Budget 101. So welcome to class, and this is something that you've experienced over and over. I'm also excited to be here with Amber Williamson as my replacement as Budget and Research Director, someone I have the ultimate respect and confidence in her ability to navigate this next couple of months. First and foremost, we want to talk to you today about our agenda, and again, these are the things that we will touch on today. These are the topics that we will discuss. First and foremost, giving you an overview of the budget process, the adoption process, and the calendar that we will walk through, as Ed mentioned, over the next 4 months. We'll also give you an overview of what the 5-year forecast is, the purpose of the 5-year forecast, as well as the overview, to give you the background, as well as those watching from home, the overview of why we do this and what it means. We will also walk you through very detailed general fund revenue assumptions that go into building this 5-year forecast. The revenue assumptions that we put into this forecast are the lifeblood of this forecast. It's again something that we've gotten very good at doing over the last couple of years, and in fact, over the last decade, our ability to forecast revenue has been, displayed on an annual basis, and we've had variances of about 1% on average over the last 10 years, which is actually unheard of to talk about that type of revenue forecasting. We'll also talk about our general fund expenditure assumptions and where those come from and what we're modeling as it pertains to providing the services that we provide today into future years. We'll also talk to you about, as Ed mentioned, the forecast results in looking at our stress testing operation to see what things look like under duress if we were to hit another downturn in the market. And then finally, we'll walk you through what our next couple of months will look like as we try to harness community input through the budget process and the adoption process. So again, just walking you very briefly through the calendar. First up is today, the 5-year forecast and general fund status. This kicks off our budget season. Next month, almost a month from today, we'll be talking to you exclusively about the general fund trial budget, and that presentation will outlay for you how we plan to spend the surplus that we present to you today. And then April 1st through April 20th, we are on pace to schedule our virtual budget hearings. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we are unable to go out to the community the way we normally do and the way we have customarily done over the last several years. So we'll be doing this virtually, but we are committed to making sure that our reach extends to as many people as possible. And then May, we come back after the budget hearings conclude, May 4th, for the city manager's proposed budget, which takes into account the feedback that we heard during those virtual budget hearings. And then you get your first bite at the apple to vote on May 18th for the council budget decision. Then in June, we come back with our legal adoption process that is mandated by state statute and city charter. June 2nd is the tentative budget adoption. That would be your second vote on the budget, followed on June 16th with our final budget adoption. And then finally, property tax adoption, July 1st. And with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to Amber Williamson.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I'm excited to be here today to talk about our 5-year general fund forecast. We do this forecast because it's considered to be a financial best practice. Over the years, we have received awards from both the Government Finance Officers Association as well as the ICMA for the good work that we do on our budget. We do this because it provides you, council, with a framework or a budgetary roadmap for adopting a balanced budget each year to help guide your decision-making so that we can protect the vital programs and services that the city our city residents have come to expect. In constructing our forecast, we do consult with a variety of different economic experts, including the University of Arizona through their forecasting project. We use the U of A's econometric model that they developed specifically for the city of Phoenix to help project our city and state sales taxes. We also look to the state's Joint Legislative Budget Committee and their Finance Advisory Committee for what they're predicting to happen in both the state and the surrounding economies in Arizona, as well as to help us project certain state-shared revenue streams. And then also the Arizona State University's Economic Outlook Center, we look to them at their Western Blue Chip also for an indication of what's going to be happening in our economy. So I want to talk just briefly about our 5-year forecast formula. Each year when we determine whether we have a surplus or a deficit, we start by evaluating our resources. Primarily, those include our city and state sales tax revenues, our state shared revenues, fees and charges, which are revenues that are generated by the city departments for all the different activities that they provide to the community, interest, transfers and recoveries, as well as a fund balance. Then we evaluate our expenditures. Primarily, our expenditures consist of mostly our employee costs, which do include the cost for our pension systems, as well as the cost to provide services to the community. This is various contractuals and commodities, and then also maintenance and repair for our capital equipment. And then also we do budget our contingency every year as an expenditure. That's our rainy day fund. So once we take our resources, less our expenditures, we arrive at either a surplus or a deficit. This year, the good news is we do have a surplus, so we can look to expand or add new city programs and services, also potentially increase employee compensation. If we were dealing with a deficit, we'd be looking at the opposite, reducing city programs and services, or possibly increasing new revenue streams. Because according to the state statutes in our city charter, we are required to have a balanced budget. So next I'll talk about our general fund revenues and some of the assumptions that we've included in our forecast. Our forecast does not assume any future fee increases or decreases and no new sources of revenue streams. We've developed our revenue estimate, as I mentioned, by using those trusted economic experts, as well as the U of A econometric model for both city and state sales tax estimations. We've taken a conservative approach to our revenue estimating because we're still dealing with some uncertainty from the pandemic. Phoenix has done very well through COVID-19 from an economic perspective. We're pretty resilient. We can respond to economic contractions and recessions because we have diversified our local economy, which is good news. We have not anticipated another further recession in the forecast period, and we also haven't assumed any negative impacts to our state shared revenues. This could come as a result of any action by the legislature to reduce income tax revenues, for example, or any reductions in our relative percent population share, which is what is used to determine our state shared revenue streams. So next I'll go over our 21-22 general fund revenue estimates by general fund revenue category. I'll start with our largest, that would be our local sales and excise taxes. This category is estimated at $550 million, or growth of 4.2%. It does represent about 40% of our overall general fund revenues. Next, our state shared revenues, estimated at $496 million, negative growth of 1.8%. This category represents just about 36% of our revenues. That negative growth rate is totally attributable to the state's decision to defer income tax filings for the last quarter of fiscal 19-20 due to the pandemic into the current year. And because our state shared income tax collections are lagged by 2 years, we won't see the impact of that deferment until 21-22. We do anticipate in 22-23 this revenue category will go back positive. Next, our primary property tax collections, estimated at $190 million. This category represents about 14% of our overall revenue. Growth is estimated at 5.7%. That growth is 100% attributable to increases in property values or assessed valuation. The primary property tax rate is not increasing. And then lastly, our user fees and other revenues. This is just under 10% of our overall revenue collections. It's estimated at $117 million, or growth of 8.3%. What I would say about this category, it was pretty negatively affected by COVID. We actually are still seeing negative growth in the current year, but we are anticipating this to grow as we come out of the pandemic next year. But that dollar value of $117 million is still not reaching pre-pandemic levels, but we anticipate that too in the following fiscal year. So overall, when we look at all of our major revenue categories, our total general fund revenues for 21-22 are estimated at $1.35 billion, or growth of 2.5%. So next I'll talk about our general fund expenditures and the assumptions that we used in our forecast. Our operating expenditure growth is based on historical growth rates, so the actual historical averages that we've seen in our operating expenditures, which is in line with CPI. It's about 2.5%. Our compensation costs are based on projections under our current council-adopted labor contracts, and as it was already indicated, for 21-22 and beyond, it is subject to current negotiations that are underway. Our contingency fund dollar amount is growing over the forecast horizon. It remains about 4% of our overall operating expenses. And then pension costs are based on the latest actuarial information. We like to evaluate pensions separately because, as I'm about to demonstrate, it represents such a considerable amount of our overall general fund budget. And for the public safety retirement system, we did base that on the growth rates are based on the 25-year amortization. So next I'll talk about our general fund pension burden. And what this chart illustrates is on the left, represented in millions, is the cost in the current year and forecasted years for pension by category. And then on the right-hand side of the chart is the percentage of our operating expenditures that pension represents. I want to provide some historical numbers to give you a perspective about how much pension has grown over the years. So I'll start by looking at the green bars, which represent our civilian or our COPR system. As you can see, costs for COPRs have started to stabilize. While they're still increasing, it's not at the pace that it was before. A lot of that is due to the pension reform. Next is our fire costs for pension. And then lastly, the blue bars is police, which represents the largest increase in pension costs. And then the black line represents the percentage of expenditures, that percent of the total expenses that pension compromises. So 15-16, our actuals were $190 million, or represented about 18% of our overall expenditures. By the time we got to fiscal year 19-20, that amount grew to $304 million, or about 23% of our expenditures. What this chart illustrates is the current year going forward through the forecast period. Those costs are anticipated to increase. The current year estimate is $319 million, representing 23% of our operating expense. And by the time we get to fiscal year 25-26, that grows to $421 million. Just about $102 million increase over the forecast period, and over 0.25% of our operating expenses. So now I'll talk about our baseline forecast. As it's been indicated, we do have a structural balanced budget. So when we look at our resources and our expenditures for each year, we arrive at a surplus of $153 million for fiscal year 21-22. What I want to point out about this is that of that surplus, a large portion of that is made up of one-time resources. Roughly $98 million is one-time, and $55 million represents ongoing resources that are available that could fund increased programs and services or employee compensation increases. In order for us to maintain a structurally balanced budget every year, as the baseline forecast demonstrates, it's very important that we don't spend one-time money on ongoing expenses. So going out over the forecast horizon, you can see our baseline forecast has surpluses that range anywhere from 0 up to $35 million in the last year of the forecast. Now, because we know that we deal with some variability, because we're in the business of predicting the future, we apply a range to our forecast. We look at an optimistic and a pessimistic range to both resources and our expenditures. We start with that 21-22 surplus of $153 million, again, $98 million one time and $55 million ongoing, and we apply those ranges to that baseline forecast to arrive at either a surplus or a deficit over the forecast horizon. As the chart demonstrates, we could have deficits as high as $25 million in fiscal year 24-25, or surpluses of $90 million in the last year of the forecast. Next, I'll talk about stress testing. So a stress test is simply just an analysis or a simulation which is designed to illustrate the impact of a set of assumptions. We want to put a pressure on our general fund resources so we can see what does that do to our ending fund balance. Because we just are technically still in a COVID recession coming out of that, it began in February of 2020, but we are slowly improving. We want to make sure we model the stress test so we can see the effects of a future recession. Although we're not predicting that, per Moody's Analytics, it is a good practice. This is the third year, actually, we've done the stress testing. So we have two scenarios. Our first scenario is a moderate recession, which involves a 1% decline in our revenues starting in 24-25 that lasts for 2 years. And then also a severe recession. That involves a 3% revenue decline, also starting in 24-25, lasting for 2 years. All other assumptions are the same as our baseline forecast. So when we look at the stress test, it reflects the impact of a hypothetical recession again, starting in 24-25, and we start with our 5-year forecast range. That would be a projected deficit of $25 million in 24-25 up to a surplus of $90 million in 25-26. When we apply negative 1% growth rates to our revenue, you can see the impact. Our deficit in 24-25 goes from negative $25 million up to negative $93 million, and that surplus in 25-26 decreases from $90 to $20 million. If we further put pressure on our revenue with a negative 3% revenue decline, that deficit goes up to negative 118 in 24-25, and our surplus in 25-26 is eliminated, and now we have a deficit of $3 million in the last year of the forecast. So we do this just to illustrate the importance of maintaining our healthy reserve or our rainy day fund to protect us from future economic stress, which can happen, and also to provide an additional consideration before the council makes any long-term financial commitments. So in summary, for our 5-year forecast for 21-22, we do have that $153 million estimated surplus, $98 million one-time, and $55 million in ongoing resources, where we can add programs and services or potentially compensation increases. Again, we want to ensure our ongoing resources do equal our ongoing expenses. We don't want to overcommit and in any way jeopardize our structurally balanced budget. We also are awaiting our holiday sales tax to finalize our revenue projections, as well as to complete our 7+5 expenditure and revenue reviews. And that brings me to our next steps. So once we have those reviews completed, we'll bring you the city manager's trial budget on March 16th. That will include recommendations for one-time and ongoing additions to the budget. Also, this year, we will be holding the virtual budget hearings. We want to make sure we get back to obtaining community input on the budget. Those are actually planned for April 2nd through the 20th. Roughly 14 hearings will take place. We're going to make sure that our Fund Phoenix tool is updated with that proposed trial budget so that residents can use the tool to give their feedback on what they'd like to see in the budget. The virtual budget hearings are going to be the same format as council meetings. We're going to make them available. We're going to have Spanish hearings as well as bilingual hearings. And we've put together a pretty comprehensive communication plan with our communications office. It involves updating our website and our newsroom with information about the hearings, also putting information out on social media, as well as in the PAYS newsletter. Also, we'll be providing information through Spanish radio and Spanish media, as well as through grocery TV ads. Again, we want to try to get the community involved in our budget process, and we will be providing that information to the council regularly so that you can consider that as you make budget decisions. And that concludes my presentation. We can answer any questions.
Thank you, Amber. Council member questions.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Councilwoman
Deborah?
Stark.
Thank you. Sorry, I had my mute button on. Amber, when you were going through the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, did you factor in what was happening at the legislature? I know there's a proposed $6 million tax cut. Was that factored in?
What I've heard is that the governor had proposed in his budget to reduce income taxes by roughly $1.2 billion. That would impact our collection starting in fiscal year 23-24, going through 25-26, because our income taxes lag 2 years. So we're estimating we could see an impact over that 3-year period of about $52 million, or it's about $26 million each year ongoing once it's fully implemented, if that were to happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any council member comments or questions? Well, thank you to our city manager, assistant city manager, and Amber. It's a good opportunity for us to reflect on the events of the last year. It looks like we got it right. We were careful and mindful. We made early reductions of around $27 million from deferring vehicle purchases to a hiring freeze, and it helped us get where we are today. We appreciate our partners at other levels of government as well, and their investment in fighting COVID in our community. It seems like we're in a position where we can make modest investment in community programs as well as employee compensation. So it looks like we can have a robust budget dialogue and move forward from here, ever mindful of pension and our many responsibilities to our community. Looking forward to the public's input through our budget hearings. We know people are still hurting and we have many community needs. I think we'll continue to watch economic indicators, which are going in multiple directions. COVID seems to be going in a more positive one, but we'll watch the increase in variance in our community as well and try to be hopeful, but have a balanced, thoughtful approach. Any comments from my colleagues? We do have one member of the public to address the council, so we will go to the phones to Mr. Mark Rodriguez.
Hello, Mayor Kate Gallego and everybody at the Phoenix City Council. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3?
We can hear you, Mark.
Awesome. It's good to hear from you, Mayor. I've been seeing you 5 times in person and all that stuff. Even on in the Levine home, it's because I always been a fan of you since 2019 when I met you. And then all of that, when you talk all that conversation and all that stuff, and you know that what it means, but hey, but it's good to hear from you guys, including Betty Wangado, Michael Norikowski, Carlos Garcia, Laura Pastor, Deborah Stark, Thelma Williams, Jim Waring, and of course Sal DeCiccio, which I'm definitely not a fan of, but hey, it's all what it is. But it's, I mean, in conversation to all the communities and here in Phoenix and all that stuff, including my precious home, Levine home, is because this is the 3rd time I'm calling you because I love talking to you all the time and all that stuff. It's all because of this. Hopefully they're doing like these COVIDs and all that stuff, and hopefully I'm staying negative because I don't want to get test positive because I wanted to be healthy and always wear my mask all the time in public, like in stores, like in restaurants, like in all type of place. Especially, you know that I'm such a huge fan of Mayor Kate Gallego because I've always been a fan of you. It's because I'm just doing love what I could to and all that stuff. That's it for me. May the force be with you.
And maybe the force be with you. Thank you, Mark. Council members, any comments or input? Please go ahead. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I just want to congratulate Ed for putting together such a responsible team that deals with our finances. We are one of the very few across the country that has this type of expertise and accuracy. So thank you very much for everyone that's not only employed in that area, but contributes to that area. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Well said, Vice Mayor. It is not an easy job to manage the budget in America's fastest growing city while we're in the middle of a pandemic. So thank you for getting us good information and forecasts. And thank you to my colleagues, including Councilman Waring, who really worked on our forecasting and trying to get us information. Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too want to thank the staff and encourage community and folks who are watching to please engage in the Fund Phoenix. I know we're going to have the virtual town halls, but I really want to encourage folks. I'm glad we're obviously in the positive, and we want to make sure to have good community input as we move forward, both, like you said, in supporting our city workers, but also different programs and things that can happen in the city. So again, just want to pitch the Fund Phoenix tool for folks to go online. They're able to break down our budget and encourage us to go in the direction that they may seem. One thing that I think is hard to talk about, Jeff, and I think I usually ask you, Professor Jeff. I think it would be. I know it's good to see worst case scenario. I like seeing best case scenario, but I also like to keep in the dialogue the potential of other things that may increase our revenue. We may not be ready for it now, but bonds or other things that might make it a little bit easier or make our budget a little bit healthier. It would be good every once in a while to just hear different ideas or proposals in which we may be able to increase our budget. It's just a thought, and thank you all so much.
Councilwoman Pastor.
I just want to thank everybody. We, as COVID-19 hit us unexpectedly and is still around, I would like to say that the staff has done an excellent job in maneuvering us through this whole process. So I want to thank staff for doing that. Secondly, I also would like to understand or very curious at how the marijuana tax will play into our budget. That way I know it's probably not this year, but next year, but how will that play in for the future? And how does that impact our budget? So we'd like to have a dialogue about that.
Mayor, Councilmember Pastor, thank you for that question, because that is an unknown, and we've been asked about that. We have not built into the revenue forecasts anything particular for legalized marijuana in Arizona. It's at this point, we feel it's too soon to know. And just a reminder, there's two components to the marijuana legalization, the tax on it. One is the normal city sales tax that's applied to any retail good that's sold. And we haven't had enough, there's not been enough time to know whether that's affecting positively or negatively our collections. For example, one thing we don't know is are sales of retail of legalized marijuana displacing something that people were already buying beforehand? Or is it actually new money into the system? We don't know that yet. The second part of legalized marijuana is the additional state taxation on recreational marijuana sales that's dedicated to, I believe it's education, highway user funds, and public safety, and that has not started to be collected or dispersed yet, and we will, in the future, have a conversation, a dialogue with the council, and the council will have a policy decision to make about how to spend that particular money dedicated to public safety. And then just to go back to Councilmember Garcia's point, we also this spring want to have a dialogue about ways to fund our pension liability that could in the future provide more resources. If we can diminish our pension costs over the long term, we can free up resources for community programs that would have gone to pension, and that's a dialogue. And marijuana, back to Councilwoman Pastor, the marijuana revenue will play a factor in that conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any additional comments? This is our final agendized item for today's policy session, so we are adjourned.